My name is Shaketta Thomas with the Coalition of Adult Basic Education, COABE, your Region 2 representative. Today, I have a wonderful guest, Andrew GottWorth, who has contributed to our latest journal edition for Learning Differences. Hello, Andrew.
Andrew GottWorth. I wrote the article on behalf of Jefferson Skills U in Louisville, Kentucky. And I recently moved to Berlin, Germany, where I'm Zooming with you now. But yes, a long time in education field, both parents were educators. And so I've been started in adult education with ESL and then taught math and then did a little bit of everything. And happy to be talking to you today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us all the way in Germany. Wow. The wonderful world of technology that really can bring us close connections and allow all of us to learn from each other, no matter where we are. So thank you again for being with us. So tell us a little bit more of why you really decided to write this article for COABE.
Yeah, so a little bit about myself, and anybody who reads the article will know it as well. So I have been in therapy since 2009 for anxiety and depression, and more recently, in the past 3 years, working on OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And so then as an educator, and having been in therapy for over 12 years, I started to notice things in my students that I saw in myself, and how that can impact learning. There was an aha moment where I had a student really struggling in math class who was usually very diligent, and I said, hey, you doing okay? She said, well, I'm moving today, and that's all I'm thinking about. And so even something like that, where it's maybe not clinical anxiety, but anxiety around, hey, I have this big day ahead, I'm moving, and my thoughts are there, and my thoughts are not on adding and subtracting negative numbers today. So I started to see that and thought, some of these lessons that I've learned in therapy, I think would be very beneficial to students and educators alike, as to how that can, addressing those needs can better help with learning.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing and just opening up and, letting others have insight into your experiences so that we can know how that may apply to the learners that we serve today. And speaking of that, how would you like for adult educators to read your article, and really find more insight and be able to apply that with their students?
Yeah, it's interesting. Mental health, though it's made great strides, I think there's still some stigma there. So sometimes, people be like, oh yeah, that's great, but not for me. And I think, a lesson here is it is for everybody. And so for our students, and I believe I quote in the article about 1 in 4 students will have some sort of mental illness. Any mental illness is what it's called. And so we already have a quarter of our students struggling with something. And then you add in students, like I mentioned before, that are moving, or maybe had a breakup, or are maybe hungry at home, and just have these other stressors in their life. That's really going to disrupt a day of learning. That's going to disrupt a lesson. And so it is a best practice. It's a research best practice. And I think sometimes we take best practices for math, and we take best practices for English, and sometimes we forget about other best practices for human beings, like mental health. And so I hope readers will take away that this is for them, this is for their students, this is a best practice, and it's something that we can implement.
Thank you so much for saying that. We know that right now we're in a mental health crisis globally, and still it is something that we're not comfortable talking about. So I hear you saying what you want readers to take away, but how can they be more consciously aware as practitioners of how they're interacting with their students to create a more open space and a safe learning environment?
Yeah, I think there are a few different tacks you can take here, right? So one is just being educated about it, knowing how many people struggle with anxiety or depression, or eating disorders, trauma, OCD like myself. Even though OCD only affects about 2% of people, there's still a chance you're going to have one of those students. But you put them all together, whether it's eating disorder, trauma, anxiety, you're definitely going to have one of those students. And so being aware of how that affects someone that might be coming late to class or having difficulty turning in assignments. Personally, I really struggled with perfectionism, and I would really get paralyzed trying to write a paper, which was funny writing this article that I felt some of those same feelings of, oh, it has to be perfect. Oh no, I'm paralyzed. But if you have a student like that who's really struggling to submit something where maybe verbally they're doing just fine, but then they get to a written assignment. So understanding what the causes of that might be, other than, not that any of our COABE teachers would say this, but thinking of a student as lazy or just blowing you off or something like that, when that's really not the case. They're dealing with this other factor. So being aware of it, having a counselor or therapist on campus or on your school can be very, very beneficial. That's something that Jefferson Skills U did that I really loved, having that accessible. And things like access to meditation apps or mindfulness apps. There are many out there. I won't call one out in particular, but there's many that can help your students and help teachers too. I think that's another thing. Sometimes we put these best practices for our students and then we forget, oh, I can use these for myself too. So those are some of the things I'd recommend.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you gave us a little tips and tools and resources that we can actually utilize in the classroom when we're working with our students. Are there any other tips or any other thoughts that you can share with us regarding learning differences, challenges, or mental health?
Yeah, I could talk to you for an hour about this, I'm sure, but to keep it brief, I think it's returning to some of those fundamentals. And like I talked in the article, that when you're thinking about something else, you're by necessity not thinking about what you should be focusing on. So if you're giving a lecture on science for the day, and I'm thinking about, if I'm anxious as a person and I'm diagnosed with anxiety, it could be anything. I'm uncomfortable with the way this shirt collar is rubbing me, and I'm just thinking about that. I'm not thinking about Punnett squares at the moment. And it can be for any student as well, even if they're just thinking about dinner and they're like, well, what do I want for dinner? Should I go out to eat? Should I do that? And, I'm teaching, you're teaching, okay, on a Punnett square, you have this column and you have this column, and they're not taking that in. And so I think it's important, not just in our efforts for mental health, but also just learning how attention works in the classroom and not being so upset with students if they go, wait, what did you say? Knowing that it could be something else going on. And I think finally, just let's all advocate for mental health. Like you said, in this time and world affairs and the pandemic and any usual year, it's still important. And I think it's something that not only students need, but practitioners need as well. So I hope not just for the students, but I hope the teachers and administrators also focus on their mental health also.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. Self-care is so paramount. We're so busy taking care of the needs of others at times that we forget that we first got to put the oxygen mask on ourselves. Well, Andrew, I really do appreciate you taking time to just come and sit with us today to give us more insight to your article that you have provided for us in our COABE Journal edition of Learning Differences. It is such an important topic to just discuss the different aptitudes and abilities that many different people have. We all are created differently, but we all have such a unique gift and the power, and we all have the capacity to learn and improve. But sometimes we just need to be aware that we all have different needs as well. So that is what you were able to provide for us. And I thank you. And I thank all of you for joining in with us today. We look forward to being with you again sometime in the near future as we continue this exploration of learning differences with our journal. Thank you so much.